BJ Blazkowicz is fading. Death's Head now goes by Deadhead. The soldier's duty is done, the day is saved, now it's time to leave. But no. Of course, that would be getting off altogether too lightly. Just a bit too cut and dried. And besides, we've got a sequel to analyse. How, oh how, did BJ end up like this? Let's find out! Essentially, Death's Head Must Die was the name of the game in the New Order, with the finale seeing you take the fight to his compound. Unfortunately, scientists are top super sneaks, and Death's Head stayed true to form with his patented stealth grenade Mark II, a boom with a view. Fortunately for BJ, the power of sheer determination means you can survive long enough to give the go-ahead for a nuclear cannon launch. Nice setup for passing on the torch, right? Maybe a sequel with Anya as lead? Nah, course not, he's BJ Big Man Blazkowicz. No tears on the cheeks of comrades for you, BJ. And this is where Wolfenstein 2 opens. A bleeding Blazko being rescued by his friends, with this setting the tone for the entire game. The game isn't really interested in the player having a good time, or at least not initially. It wants to punish you, to peel you raw with one blow after the other. Intestinal loss, wheelchairs, the beheading of your best friend. Wolfenstein 2 doesn't pull its punches. Oh, and as a nice topping on this misery cake, Blazko has become a gun-toting wet paper bag with his health capped at 50 for the first half of the game due to his injuries. The situations you're placed in seem ideally suited to charging around at top speed, making Nazi mist with your dual-wielded guns. But with the health cap, these areas feel oppressive, claustrophobic. Having recently played Doom, which focuses on movement at all costs, this just felt off to me. I mean, take this for example. And then look at this.
We'll have to recharge this thing somewhere.
So for me, Wolfenstein is a jarring shift, though an effective one. Battles are tough, an uphill struggle between what you want to do and what you're forced to do. The game makes you advance slowly, trying to pick off enemies in stealth as much as possible, before peeking out from cover and taking potshots at the advancing Nazis. It's a bold idea for the beginning of a game, and the alienation a lot of people have had with the start because of its difficulty is completely understandable, but for those that stick with it, the corresponding power trip later on is made all the more enjoyable by this contrast with the start of the game. BJ's fragility is the triumph of Wolfenstein 2. The exploration of his childhood with his loving mother and his abusive father play into the two halves of BJ himself. On the one side we have the man who cares for his friends, who deeply loves Anya and who stands for the ideals of America. And on the other side is a lover of ultraviolence, a man who will throughout the course of the game kill scores upon scores of Nazis by hatchets, bullets, lasers and fire. They all fall to his hand. The violence is noble and justifiable since they're Nazis, but the violence is still there. It's just a violence of liberation rather than the Nazi violence of oppression. Throughout the game's first half, Blazko gets the Gold Star treatment, from losing the use of his legs for a wheelchair-bound defense of the Resistance's submarine to gaining the power suit and the ability to walk. From the now dead Caroline we feel his pain. His hushed whispers to his dead friend thanking her for lending him her wings are powerful. I mean, just listen to this.
Caroline, I'm hurting. Will you lend me your wings? But your suit and the cause is all that keeps me upright. And Anya, her voice, her glory, it buckles me.
BJ knows that he is dying, and his inability to tell Anya, the soon-to-be mother of his twins, is tough. His only outlet again being his dead BFF Caroline. These moments pay off when BJ overcomes this hurdle, when he tells Anya the truth and liberates himself.
I feel like you've been avoiding me. What's wrong? Talk to me.
Look at me, Anya. I'm the damn Tin Man. How am I gonna get close to you?
I don't care. We'll figure something out. We always do. Huh? Hey, why won't you at least try?
because I'm fucking dying. The longer we keep pretending it won't happen, the harder it's gonna be. I'll be in the ground a week from now.
You don't know that! What, you can see the future now? Don't act like you know things you can't possibly know!
Well, the toilet works.
Then, after a couple more missions, taking in blowing up a commander's station and killing his father, BJ gets captured. His friends botch an escape attempt and Super Spesh, a member of the Resistance, is killed. BJ goes on trial for his crimes, being sentenced to death. But then, it looks like some of the Nazi grunts skipped a day from Nazi school and missed prisoner restraint 100 times. BJ rips out of his harness and sentences everyone else in the courtroom to life imprisonment. In hell. I'm sorry, I just couldn't help myself. Moving swiftly on. BJ dies a few times before realising that he should just hide at the top of the stairs and kill the Nazis one by one. And then he finds his mother, which, given that she's actually dead, is never a good sign for this being reality and not a dream. Regardless, BJ has a heartfelt reunion, his head cradled in her lap as he apologises for leaving her with his father, who ultimately sold her out as a Jew to the Nazis. This scene culminates in him confessing he doesn't know if he has the strength to go on before she stresses that there is only one more hardship to endure. And then he wakes up, back in the courtroom, and is dragged off for his execution on the National Mall, which has been suitably Nazi'd up. Lincoln replaced with Hitler, liberty replaced with oppression. Frau Engel then proceeds to hack off BJ's head with a sword, as he laments that the old and the weak are doomed. His head is thrown down to a furnace, though luckily the Resistance have thought ahead and managed to catch it with a drone and get it back before throwing it in a jar. BJ's back in a box, and this signals the return to that form of Nazi fighting. BJ has his head attached to a Nazi super soldier's body, wakes up next to Anya, and is no longer heading on that path towards certain death. The soldier is healed, emotionally and physically. And this is where the game's story really gives up the ghost, and BJ goes on a series of missions to get some documents, rescue some other Resistance fighters, and then travel to Venus for a movie audition with Hitler in order to get some more documents and codes, and then finally BJ and the team mount an assault on a flying battleship to get what is presumably going to be the hub for the third game, and then onto Frau Engel for a good old hatchet to the face on national television to kickstart the revolution. Yay! Oh, and then the game has an interesting choice of backing music for the credits. Yeah, it's not good. The annoying thing is, the actual shooting sections of this second half are pretty good all round. Although it doesn't match the kinetic energy of Doom, where its verticality and glory kills added extra layers and nuance to the action, it feels pretty great. BJ gets access to some contraptions along with his new super soldier body, and while they're never that useful, they at least offer some other options and passive perks alongside their use. The increased health pool is a welcome relief, and the ensuing action feels that much better in contrast to the game's first half. If the game had been like this since the start, the payoff of increasing BJ's health here would not have felt nearly as gratifying. BJ's still a bit weak, not quite an uber soldier, but at least he's gone from wet paper bag to, still a sort of paper bag, but maybe it's dry and made out of higher grade paper. A reinforced paper bag is what he is. So what I'm trying to say is that the overarching narrative never quite feels right. Sure, in theory there's high stakes, i.e. reawakening the American people and kickstarting a revolution against the Nazis, but it all too often boils down to, go to this place, hoover up a resistance group, go to this place, kill some Nazis, go to this place, steal some documents, go to this. I'm gonna have a little nap, and then the game will be finished. Part of this is due to the fact that this is the middle game of a planned trilogy. The New Order set out the world BJ finds himself in, the war already lost, and the evil of the Nazis acutely spelled out with the original game's concentration camp level. This sequel, though it is filled with a ragtag bunch of well-written characters and fantastic cutscenes, never quite knows where it stands narratively, at least on the grand scale. It expands a bit on the world building from the New Order by going to America, but never feels as fresh since that game set up the world in the first place. It can't have the highest of stakes since there's the finale of the trilogy to sort all that out. If I was being mean, I'd call its plot filler. Nah, screw it. The new Colossus has a filler plot, okay? It is an acute sufferer of middle game syndrome. For example, the game attempts to examine the psyche of a nation under an oppressive rule. It takes this opportunity to turn the lens on America. It rightly criticises the America of the 60s, a place which espoused liberty for all while still enforcing the Jim Crow laws. The section in Roswell is the game at its most obvious. You walk around this American Nazi street whilst two Americans gleefully talk about a slave auction. A couple of the newly empowered KKK get accosted by a literal grammar Nazi, and swastikas flutter in the breeze. This section makes the argument that some Americans might have just embraced Nazi rule had it happened. This is problematic in the scope of the game's grander narrative. It tries to argue about the grinding down of the average American under Nazi rule, but it contradicts itself. The game's plot is all about reigniting the embers of resistance which have been subdued. However, this section in Roswell, along with the actions of BJ's father, don't show a people oppressed. It shows a people embracing Nazism as a return to the good old days, when KKK walked the streets and those darn blacks knew their place. It doesn't show me an America worth saving. Sure, the resistant groups are, resisting, but these are people who were opposed to the America that was around before the Nazis got there. Grace's resistance group is a sort of Black Panther civil rights movement amalgam, and Horton's gang of socialists and anarchists are the self-appointed freethinkers against the bourgeoisie. These groups are small and weren't part of mainstream America. I mean, here, BJ himself rails at Horton whilst drunk when he first meets him.
So what's it gonna be? You hillbilly, degenerate moonshiner, Bolshevik cowards, goddamn traitors.
In Roswell, however, we see a whole town of people who have seemingly embraced the Nazi ideology. We don't hear any grumblings or reservations in hushed voices. About the only person opposed is this drunk guy in a back alley. Of course, this could be labelled as the effectiveness of Nazi rule. The rooting out of subversives leaves only subservient America behind. But if this is the case, then the whole driving force of the plot is undermined. There aren't any embers left to relight. They have been thoroughly stamped out, and the little resistance group of the Cries Out Circle is all that is left. Their call to arms will fall on deaf ears. This is where I think there was a missed opportunity within the arc of Wolfenstein 2's story. Yes, Roswell could have remained as a lesson of how easy it is to slip into authoritarian rule, at least if you're not one of the people it actively targets, but this should have been balanced by showing the hurt the Nazis had wrought in America. Sure, we have the nuclear wasteland of Manhattan which we see a few times, but this is an action of the past. I mean, just listen to this story from Grace about the aftermath.
When I came up, it looked like a vision out of Dante's Inferno, you know what I'm saying? I remember Maine people just wandering through the smoke. I remember screams echoing through the bombed out buildings like howling ghosts. And I remember this mother and son. This boy was blindly stumbling through the chaos. His arms were outstretched, calling out for his mama. And the heat from the bomb had melted the skin on his arms, and they just drooped. Like he was wearing a shirt that was a couple of sizes too big. And I remember his mama. She was crawling to get to him. And the half of her body was all gone. It was just gone.
This is deeply unsettling, but the problem is it's all second-hand. We didn't experience it. We didn't see these horrors. Whereas we see Roswell. We see the insidious nature of this takeover of America and how easily it is accepted. Surprisingly enough, Machine Games actually included the perfect setting for the horrors of Nazi rule to be shown, namely New Orleans. Ostensibly a ghetto, by the time BJ comes on the scene, it's been purged. The wall around the ghetto remains imposing, but inside we don't see any ordinary citizens oppressed by the Nazis. Instead, we're met with a whole glut of Nazi patrols and ruined buildings, and eventually Horton's resistance group. This is a wasted chance for a shot of narrative motivation. This could have been the perfect counterpoint to Roswell, the actual effects of authoritarian rule on anyone the Nazis don't like. We could have seen a people subdued, ground down while trapped in the squalor forced on them, people who, with the right spark, would go up like dry tinder and kickstart the revolution. But no. Instead, it's Nazi patrols and a distinct lack of citizens. We see destruction post the fact, and not the suffering that preceded it. This section doesn't engage you, it doesn't show the impact of the ghetto, instead just boils down to killing some Nazis and rescuing some resistance fighters. This brings us on to the actual villains, and why, at least in the new Colossus, they're a bit of a cop-out. Nazis are one of the easiest villains in the book, but they're also one that makes storytellers the laziest. We don't need to show their inhumanity or establish their motivation. They're Nazis. Of course they're evil. Sure, we'll have them kill a couple of people and generally be strict and nasty, but that's about it. They're Nazis. It's so embedded in our heritage that Nazis are bad, we don't need to establish any motivation within the story for the main villains of the piece. They crave power and have an extreme hatred for anyone who doesn't conform to their ideals. The first game at least had the chops to examine why we should hate the Nazis, whereas this time round it's just taken as read. Their main motivation in this game, seeing as they've already conquered America and even Venus, is just to crush the resistance and kill Terror Billy. They've won the war, after all. This is just mopping up. Personally, I love a villain with a bit more of an engaging reason for why they're doing what they're doing, but I suppose this is the limitation of Nazis as a villain. Their motivation is that they're Nazis and believe in Nazi ideology, and that's about it. So, overarching plot's a bit naff, but the moment-to-moment story is engaging. The party scene, for example, still sticks in my memory. I mean, just look at this.
Tonight is for Blazkowicz.
The story from Grace about Manhattan was chilling, and hell, even the toilet humour managed to sit in the mix okay. This weird mix of schlock and seriousness, humour and pain just keeps wrong-footing you. It's odd. It enhances the extremes. The sadness and laughter stand out because you're never quite prepared for what's coming next, so you always get sucker punched. Essentially, Wolfenstein 2 is a game of contradictions. Its story is both quite bad on an overarching level while having some of the best written dialogue and cutscenes I've seen in a video game. The game's combat is this weird mix of stealth and action which works sometimes. The first half is frustrating, but by virtue of this, the second half feels pretty damn good because of the contrast. And, of course, the final contradiction. The game is one of my favourites of recent years, while remaining one that I have a snagging suspicion has tricked me somehow into liking it despite its numerous flaws. Roll on Wolfenstein 3, the one that's actually good all the way through, successfully unifying its various disparate sections into a cohesive whole? Well, I've got some time to work on the subtitle, I guess.